Do you feel overwhelmed by the wide variety of miniature paint ranges these days? Or perhaps you're only familiar with Citadel Color or the Army Painter and are wondering if there are better alternatives? Then this is for you. In this extra long video, I thoroughly test the most important acrylic hobby paint brands. So grab your painting supplies, a model and a hot beverage and listen in. Over the next 90 minutes you'll learn all about the paint ranges that you have to know. The Army Painter, Vallejo, AK, Acryl and two thin coats. We'll start with the popular Warpaints Fanatic range. If there's one thing that the Army Painter is good at, then it's generating buzz on social media.
We have quality up here, the perfect paint being the best we can make him, the best paint in the world.
The best paint in the world. The best paint in the world.
But I found that the quality control can be hit or miss. Over the last couple of years, I tested all major miniature paint ranges, so I have a really good idea of what an acrylic paint can do these days. I tried all 260 colors of the new range and I'll tell you if the Army Painter can live up to the promises. I'm Stahly from Tale of Painters and this is the truth about Warpaints Fanatic. I reviewed so many paint ranges over the years and I see a trend. I think the paint quality has improved significantly over what we used in the hobby 10 or 20 years ago. It started with Acryl, then AK 3rd Gen, two thin coats and the new Vallejo Game Colors followed suit along with all the Kickstarter paints. For me, all of these ranges represent a new generation of miniature paints and now the Army Painter wants to catch up with the Warpaints Fanatic. And perhaps they had to catch up because the old Warpaints range didn't have a good reputation among many painters. Often you'd get a paint with the dreaded issue where only transparent medium came out of the bottle while the pigments had settled at the bottom into a thick gunk. The Army Painter made videos on how to fix this and started to include agitators in the bottles for better blending when shaken. But in my experience, affected paints would separate again and again no matter what you do, which was simply annoying. All of this is supposed to change now with a brand new Warpaints Fanatic, which the Army Painter has been working on for several years.
We have 300 to 700% more pigment in, we have a new stabilizer developed, and we have a higher quality resin base.
They even claim the new Warpaints might probably be
the best paint in the world.
In this video, I go through all the acrylics, effect paints, washes and metallics and find out if that's true. But first, I want to take a look at the color palette, because the Army Painter decided to do something really unique here. There are 162 acrylics, 80 metallics, 18 washes and 18 effect paints, which will be available individually or in various sets launching in early 2024. This is more colors than the Citadel Color range and makes them one of the largest paint ranges on the market. But what I find really ingenious is the flexible triad system. This means that each color comes in 6 shades from dark to light in a consistent hue. The idea is that you can layer or blend without having to mix intermediate tones, or you can simply pick a dark, light and mid-tone and combine them as you see fit. I absolutely love this and I think it's very intuitive for beginners, while advanced painters will appreciate the choice. However, there's also a massive flaw to the system and I'll address that later when I get to the individual colors. I really adore the color palette, lots of rich and vibrant tones, and I love that there are so many pinks, turquoise and teal colors. The only thing I find lacking is the more yellowish olive green tones. There's really only Tundra Taupe. Additionally, some warm rust and golden brown tones like Scrag Brown or Mournfang Brown from Games Workshop are also missing. Now the actual paints come in the familiar 80ml dropper bottles like all Army Painter paints. 2 mixing boards are included, which is good, and each label is printed with a graphic indicating which triad the color belongs to. There's also a practical color description based on the ISCC NBS system of color designation. In terms of pricing, individual bottles will be $4.25 or €3.50, so almost as pricey as a pot of Citadel Color. Though, Warpaints will have 50% more paint compared to the 12ml pots of Citadel. I've acquired a complete paint set with all 260 colors and tested each one. Let's take a look at the metallics first. Now I would say I have a special relationship with the Army Painter's metallic paints. The first generation Warpaints, which you can recognize by the old label with the paint splatter graphic, had excellent metallics. The composition reminded me strongly of the brilliant metallic paints from the 2000 Citadel color range, namely Bolt Gunmetal and Mithril Silver. I really enjoyed using those. However, when the Warpaints range was expanded, the metallics changed. Although the Army Painter continued to advertise them as the best metallics, I found the coverage and grain of the metallic flakes only average. Not bad, but more average. With the Warpaints Fanatic, the Army Painter claims that the best metallics have now become even better. The formula has been completely reworked based on the experiences with the metallic speed paints. Instead of mineral mica flakes, Warpaints Fanatic now feature finer and more opaque aluminium flakes. There are 18 colors in total, including 12 colors taken from the old range and 6 new ones like Mithril, Cobalt Metal and Dark Emerald. Let's put them on a model. Here you can see how I apply both the old and Fanatic plate mail metal next to the original first gen paint. Can you already see a difference in consistency? I would say the old version has significantly coarser metallic flakes and doesn't cover that well. Now the Fanatic version is quite thick, but it thins down nicely and goes on super smoothly and covers very well even when diluted with water. And here you can see the dried paints in comparison. The original first gen plate mail metal, the current Warpaints version and the new Fanatic plate mail metal. I really like the finish of the Fanatic version. How about you? Here's another comparison with Greedy Gold and Retributor armor from Games Workshop. What do you think? For me, the finish is pretty much identical. Can't see much of a difference, which I think is great, because Retributor armor is one of the best warm orange gold paints. I also tested all the other new metallics and they are all quite fantastic. The silver ones are the standouts, but even the gold and bronze colors only need 2, maybe 3 thin layers for perfect coverage and have a beautiful metallic finish. That's a significant improvement over their predecessors from the old Warpaints range. I give the Fanatic Metallics 9 out of 10 points. The only thing I can criticize is that the paints are quite thick and I would have liked more bronze and copper colors. Compared to other non-alcohol based products on the market, I would say the Army Painter's new metallics are up there with the best. Here you can see Vallejo Model Air Steel, which is the best bright silver paint I ever used, and the new Mithril from the Army Painter comes pretty close. The only difference is the viscosity. The Fanatic metallics are all quite thick and need to be thinned, while the Vallejo metallics are airbrush paints and pre-thinned but work well for brush painting too. Alright, that's a good start for the Fanatic range. Next, let's take a look at the quick shade washes. These are quite popular, and while the Army Painter says they haven't changed the formula, I say they did. Question is, a change for the better or for the worse? I'll show you. Now I've been using the Army Painter's original quick shade washes for many years. Yeah, I'm old. Truth is, I wear the mask to hide all my wrinkles. I used to be a big fan of the first gen Citadel washes from Games Workshop. Remember those? When these were phased out and the Citadel shade paints were introduced in 2012, I didn't like the change. So I switched to the Army Painter's quick shade washes, and Dark and Strong Tone made excellent replacements for Old Barda Black and Devlin Mud. This went on for many years, but lately I've had quite a few bottles that dried quite shiny and gave me slightly blotchy results. Therefore, I switched to the Citadel shades with a new 2022 formula, which I actually really like. Lately, I've also been quite fond of the Pro Acryl washes. So with all my history, I was very curious to see if the washes in the Fanatic range had returned to their old strength. There are 4 new colors: orange tone, dark red tone, magenta tone, dark blue tone and rust tone, which means more choice, which I like. Apart from the new colors, the Army Painter says they didn't change the washes, but spoiler, that's not true. Here you can see how I apply the new dark toned wash on a Termagant with a white undercoat. As you can see, the flow properties are very good. The washes seem to be a bit thinner and runnier than their previous versions. But don't worry, the capillary action pulls the pigments into the recesses very well. Here you can see the new strong toned wash and the strong skin wash, which also go on nicely. And here are the washes in their dried state. What do you think? I see a very even distribution, even on large flat surfaces, and strong shadows. The finish is not matte, but satin, I would say. I think the result is excellent, and the glossiness and inconsistencies that I sometimes encountered with the old Warpaint washes seem to be gone. Here you can see a comparison with Citadel's shade paints, which have also given me a good result but have more of a shine and are of course much more expensive per milliliter. So the quick shade washes might not be the same anymore, I think they're even better. I'm giving them a score of 8.5. Now, we still have the effect paints and of course the 162 acrylics to check out. To be honest, I found the Army Painter's previous effect paints to be rubbish. Let's see if the new ones can win me over. Before we dive into the acrylics and flexible triads, let's take a look at the effect paints. I didn't like the effect paints from the old Warpaints range. They were just glossy paints, not at all like Games Workshop's technical paints, which each have their individual properties. Recently, I tested the new Vallejo Game Color range, and their special FX paints didn't impress me that much either. I mean, honestly, except for the useless gemstone paints, Citadel technical paints are just hard to beat. Maybe the Army Painter can do what others can't. Well, there's a total of 18 paints, including varnishes, thinners, fluorescent colors and some special paints. Let's start with those. Now, Blood for the Blood God is my favorite blood effect paint. It's just so slimy and gory. Fanatic True Blood comes close, it's similarly sticky and gel-like, and the shade of red is spot on. Here's Nurgle's Rod from Games Workshop, and its counterpart Oozing Vomit from the Fanatic range is almost identical in color, but it seems to have more texture. This is Typhus Corrosion, a greasy dark brown with added particles. The Fanatic range has several rust colors. Here is Fresh Rust, a rust orange that also leaves a texture, and this is Dark Rust, which is closer in color to Typhus Corrosion. Here I'm applying Disgusting Slime, which is similar to Oozing Vomit but even more greenish. Verdigris is the counterpart to Nihilak Oxide, and Oil Stains creates dark, oily streaks. And here are the effect paints when dried. So what do you think? Unfortunately, True Blood is a bit less moist and glossy than Blood for the Blood God when dried, but besides that, the effect paints get a big thumbs up from me. I would give them an 8 out of 10. For me, they might be the first that can keep up with Citadel's technical paints, and the Warpaints Fanatic range has even more effects to choose from, like oil stains or a couple of fluorescent colors. The 5 fluo paints are quite solid, they just have a weak opacity like most fluorescent paints do. Speaking of coverage, how about the acrylic paints? Is the coverage really as exceptional as the Army Painters marketing wants us to believe? I have my doubts, but let's find out. As mentioned earlier, lately I've tested Acryl, 2 thin coats and the new Vallejo Game Colors, among others, all of which already have very high opacity and a super creamy consistency. But in the videos and on the website, the Army Painter promises unparalleled uniformity in coverage, with 500 to 700% more pigment than other paints, so I wonder if the Army Painter can really top that. We'll see. Let's put some paint on a palette. Look at this consistency. Quite thick, isn't it? Not all, but most colors tend to have a rather thick consistency, quite reminiscent of the former Warpaints or Vallejo model colors, but the Fanatic formula is creamier and more uniform. By the way, I'm happy to say that the dreaded Army Painter effect of only transparent medium coming out of the bottle was not an issue at all and seems to be a thing of the past. So, to achieve a smooth application, the paints definitely need to be thinned with a drop of water. Now you could argue that this increases the yield, so more bang for your buck or squid for your quid. Personally, I'm a bit lazy and have gotten used to the slightly thinner consistency of paints like Acryl or Vallejo Game Color, which most of the time can be used directly from the bottle with the added moisture from a wet palette. But that's just my personal preference. How about you? Do you prefer a thinner or thicker paint? Let me know in the comments. Here's a test model, the right side painted with the aforementioned paint brands. For the left side, I'm using the new Warpaints Fanatic to give the Termagant the classic High Fleet Hydra color scheme we all know from Space Hulk. And I have to say, once you've thinned the colors to the right consistency, painting becomes really enjoyable. They flow well from the brush, the coverage is high, and thanks to the slightly extended drying time, they blend well and you don't have to worry about visible brush strokes as the self-leveling properties are quite good. Here's the result. I think it looks quite decent. But how revolutionary is the coverage really? In the promo videos, the army painter implied that many of the lighter colors like yellow and orange would cover almost completely with a single coat. Does that hold true? Let's try it out. I'm putting Demonic Yellow, Lava Orange and Pure Red from the Fanatic range to the test, comparing them against Vallejo Game Color Moon Yellow, Pro Acryl Orange and 2 thin coats Demon Red. Here's the first coat of Warpaints Fanatic over a black primer. Since the Fanatic paints are quite thick, I had to thin them with a drop of water each, while this wasn't necessary with their counterparts from the other brands. By the way, they also work well with an airbrush, but require a lot of thinning, so you might want to look into the Army Painter's Warpaints Air range, which comes pre-thinned and is pretty good. And here's the result after one coat. The Warpaints Fanatic colors perform well, but one coat is not enough to be fully opaque. Actually, there isn't a significant difference compared to Game Color, Pro Acryl or 2 thin coats. The Army Painter marketing debunked. Here's the test base after the second coat. The playing field is still pretty even. By the way, would you fancy a video where, for example, I test all yellow paints from all brands to see which has the best coverage? Let me know in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss it in any of my reviews. And this is the result after 3 thin coats. Can you see a clear winner? Honestly, I can't. The yellow and light red from the Army Painter might be a tiny bit more opaque than Moon Yellow and Demon Red, but the difference isn't significant. Considering that yellow, orange and red have the weakest pigments, all brands performed well. After testing all 162 colors, I can attest that the Warpaints Fanatic range is indeed a very high opacity, especially with midtones and darker colors, which even beat the Citadel base paints most of the time. For the lighter tones, my impression is that coverage is on par with Pro Acryl and AK 3rd Gen, which is excellent. However, I feel that the lighter colors in the 2 thin coats in the new Vallejo Game Color range might cover just a tiny bit better, but don't get me wrong, it's not much of a difference. The more notable difference is in the finish. Warpaints Fanatic have a satin finish, similar to Citadel paints. The trend in modern miniature paints leans more towards matte paints, and I've grown to prefer that, but a satin finish has its advantages too. The colors appear deeper and the resistance to wear is slightly higher. What do you prefer, matte or satin? Feel free to write it in the comments. So far so good. However, and I know my videos are full of howevers and buts, however, I got 28 problems with the Warpaints Fanatic. But paint quality ain't one. The first thing that bothers me is the color match. Yes, the Warpaints Fanatic range is an entirely new paint range with a new formula and a new color palette. Nevertheless, the Army Painter chose to carry over some colors from the old Warpaints range. I've painted a random selection of the returning colors on this base. On the left are the old Warpaints and on the right are their counterparts from the Warpaints Fanatic range. What do you think of the match? I think some colors are quite close, particularly those that are also available as color primer sprays. But overall, the match is far from perfect. I mean, I get it, Warpaints Fanatic have an entirely new formulation, but then maybe the Army Painter should have cut ties with the old range completely to avoid any confusion. So if your paint scheme is based on a specific old Warpaints color, I recommend stocking up now while the old paints are still available. Otherwise, the paint jobs in your collection might not be consistent anymore. And the other 27 problems are in fact 27 flexible triads. Well, perhaps not all of them. I know at the beginning of the video I said I love the idea, and a lot of the triads are great, for example the vivid blue and the teal one. There's an even distribution of light to dark colors, just as I would expect. But others, I've put some random examples here, do you see what I mean? In my opinion, many of the triads lean too much towards the bright side. I'm missing the darker colors. For some triads it might make sense, for example, you can jump from Emerald Forest, the darkest color in the vivid green triad, to the darker greens in the deep green triad. But if you only have 6 olive greens in the range, I would have wished for the darkest tone to be really dark, like Castellan Green or Death Corps Drab from Games Workshop. As you can see here, as a result, the emphasis on lighter tones means that the steps between the individual colors become often rather small. I think for most painters, it won't make sense to buy all 6 colors per triad. For most triads, you could easily skip every second color. But then, not all flexible triads are balanced in the same way. The official chart from the website can point you in the right direction, but it's just a digital reproduction and not always that accurate. So I hand painted all colors on plastic card and photographed them professionally. You can download the high-res chart on my Patreon. I've also got compatible charts for the Citadel range, the new Vallejo Game Colors and others, so you can cross-reference colors across different brands. But overall, I don't want to sound too negative. Even though some triads might not be ideally composed for my taste, the sheer choice makes more than up for it. The Fanatic range has many beautiful and unique colors that would definitely find a place in my collection. The acrylics are nice to work with and the opacity is high, so they get an 8 out of 10 from me. But don't close the video just yet. I still have some final thoughts plus the best alternatives to the Warpaints range to share. So the truth is, Warpaints Fanatic are probably not the best paints, but they are a very good all-rounder range. The acrylics, metallics, washes and even the effect paints are of a consistently high quality, so I give the whole range a quite solid 8.5 out of 10 points. They might not be a revolution and they have a few quirks that you must be aware of, as I explained throughout the video. But if you're only familiar with the old Warpaints and or the Citadel paint range, then upgrading to Warpaints Fanatic will be a quantum leap. You will notice the difference in quality, even if you don't consider yourself a pro painter, and they will make your painting more enjoyable. On the other hand, if you already have paints from what I call the new generation of acrylic paints, then the Warpaints Fanatic won't be anything special for you, but they can meet the high standard. For this reason, these are the best alternatives. Pro Acryl paints have the same high coverage as Warpaints Fanatic, and they are also good all-rounders with excellent acrylics, metallics and washes. The difference is that the paints are a bit thinner and don't need to be diluted as much. The finish is also more matte. However, the Pro Acryl range doesn't have triads and has far fewer colors, so you'll need to mix more. Personally, I like the acrylics from the new Vallejo Game Color range a tad better than those from the Fanatic range, because they are more matte, require hardly any thinning, and I feel that many of the lighter colors cover a tiny bit better. They are also a bit cheaper. However, the range has less than half of the colors of the Fanatic range, and the metallics, washes and special effect paints are not as great as the Warpaints Fanatic ones. AK 3rd Gen has a very extensive color palette, but since there are no triads or a similar system, the range can be challenging to navigate. However, there are many natural colors designed specifically for historical models and uniforms and more realistic color schemes. The quality and coverage are excellent and all for a competitive price. But in my opinion, there's only one real alternative to Warpaints Fanatic if you only want one range to cover all corners. And that would be Duncan Road's Too Thin Coats. What started as a meme has now become a fully fledged 60 colors paint range thanks to Kickstarter and the power of the internet. But do we really need yet another paint range? Can Duncan reinvent the wheel, or are his paints just a cash grab to exploit his popularity? I'm Stahly from Tale of Painters, and this is my in-depth review of all 60 Too Thin Coats paints. Many of you remember Duncan Rhodes as Games Workshop's original painting presenter. With his calm manner, clean painting style and catchphrase Too Thin Coats, he introduced many hobbyists to the wonderful world of painting. Duncan has since left Games Workshop and started his own YouTube channel and website, the Duncan Rhodes Painting Academy, where you can watch painting tutorials for a small monthly fee. This was followed in September 2021 by a Kickstarter in cooperation with Transatlantic Games, launching Duncan's very own paint range. The Kickstarter was a huge success, raising over $1 million thanks to over 7,800 backers. Now the Too Thin Coats paints are shipping and available in stock at my partner shop Wayland Games. Duncan and his team sent me a complete set and I was able to test the colors extensively. And I have a few things to say. Here are my thoughts. Too Thin Coats paints come in dropper bottles with added agitators, which gets the first thumbs up from me. The bottles are different from the bottles of other manufacturers, such as the Army Painter and Vallejo, but the diameter is the same, so they fit easily into all matching paint racks. A single bottle contains 50 ml of paint, 3 ml more than regular Citadel paints, but 2 or 3 ml less than the Army Painter, Vallejo and Scale 75. The RRP is £3.95, so £1.20 more than a regular Citadel paint. That makes Duncan's paints the most expensive miniature paint per milliliter on the market. The Two Thin Coats range has 60 colors, which break down to 6 washes, 6 acrylic paints and 48 acrylic colors. There are also a few stretch goal exclusive paints, such as a transparent medium and a blood effect paint. The paints are arranged in triads, each with a matching shadow, midtone and highlight color. This makes color selection really intuitive, especially for beginners. I'm a big fan of paint ranges that do this. Unfortunately, the triads are not printed on the labels, as is the case with the Army Painter's Air range, so you have to look them up on the website or on the flyer that comes with the Kickstarter shipment. The color names are the typical fantasy names which apparently became the industry standard, so you can't always tell which colors belong together judging from the name alone. For those more familiar with Citadel paints, there's a handy paint conversion chart that lists the closest Citadel and the Army Painter counterpart for each color. The 60 paints and washes cover a little bit of everything. The selection seems to be based on the most popular Citadel paints. You can find primary and secondary colors, various brown, bone and Caucasian skin tones, black, grey and white, as well as silver, gold and bronze. However, as the range is comparatively small at only 60 paints, Two Thin Coats lack some tertiary and more outlandish colors such as drab greens, blue-green, teal and pink, skin tones specifically designed for darker or golden skin, and in general, some more choice in the primary colors. But from what I've heard, the color palette will be expanded at some point, probably with a second Kickstarter, so stay tuned. Now let's pop them onto the palette and see how the paints perform. Two Thin Coats dry to a satin finish that leans more towards the matte than towards the glossy side, and they match nicely with most other paint ranges such as Citadel Colors, the Army Painter Warpaints and Formula P3. I noticed some minor separation between medium and pigments, but thanks to the added agitators, paints are perfectly blended after a quick shaking. The consistency is incredibly creamy and silky smooth, similar to AK Interactive 3rd Gen or Pro Acryl paints, but with a slightly thicker consistency, more like Citadel base paints. I recommend adding a small drop of water or using a wet palette, which adds extra moisture to the paint and keeps it fresh and flowy. With a little bit of water, the paints go on super smoothly and won't leave any streaks at all. I was really impressed with how pleasant they are to work with, and I own over 1,000 of paints from all miniature paint brands out there. The drying time, and thus the working time, is longer than say Citadel or the Army Painter paints. I guess the paint includes a good amount of drying retarder additives, which might also be responsible for the smooth application. This comes in handy for wet blending and feathering, and also for airbrushing. With the right amount of thinner, I had no problems with clogging at all, and the paint sprayed very smoothly. And even when heavily diluted for glazing, you get a beautiful, even result. But if you want to apply a few base coats quickly, I found I often had to use a hairdryer even when batch painting several models. But I can't complain about the very rich pigmentation, and I found the coverage to be well above average as well. Most of the medium and darker colors really cover in two thin coats over a dark base coat. That's actually pretty good. Let's take a look at the individual triads. To get a perfect comparison, I painted all colors on a sheet of medium grey primed plastic card and photographed it professionally under neutral 5500K light. You can download this comparison sheet on my website taleofpainters.com, a link is in the description below. The red triad is pretty amazing with very high coverage and a lovely set of colors. Berserker Red and Sanguine Scarlet cover with two thin coats. Demon Red needs 3, but it's a super intense bright red, actually even more vibrant than Evil Sun Scarlet. As expected, the yellow and orange paints need a few more coats to become fully opaque, but they are at least as richly pigmented as Citadel's yellow and orange paints, if not better. Composition-wise, I think Yellow Flame should be a bit lighter, and the shadow paint Dark Sun Yellow is a more muted mustard yellow, similar to Avalanche Sunset, so it doesn't really fit the triad's two other vibrant yellows. It's the same with Orange Rust, which is also more desaturated than the other two oranges. The Burgundy triad also has great coverage, the colors are rather muted though. The purple Triad boasts great opacity as well, and I especially like Sorcerer's Cloak, which is a much better covering alternative to Genestealer Purple. Let's move to blue and green. The blues are your classic Ultramarines Smurf blues. They cover all very well, even the light ones, but the Triad is quite imbalanced, as Elysian blue is too close to Celestial blue in my opinion. The blue-grey Triad is pretty nice though, and has also fantastic opacity, perfect for painting Space Wolves. The green Triad is solid as well, with much better coverage than Citadel's Warpstone Glow and Mood Green. With cream and bone, there's quite a lot of choice. We have a warm grey Triad, which I really like, as Ivory Tusk is the proper mid-tone that Citadel's Pallid Witch Flesh and Rakar Flesh are missing. The bone Triad is a bit dark, and Skeleton Legion and Dragonfang are a bit too close for my taste. At least they are not as yellowish as Citadel bones. We also have some khakis, which all cover amazingly, but they're also all quite close. These two are not my most favorite Triads in the range, but serviceable with some mixing. But I really love the brown Triad. Every color is a lovely chocolate to mocha brown. Coverage is also amazing, and I can see using this Triad a lot. We also have a more reddish brown Triad, which is also decent, with a high opacity as well. And then we have a Triad of medium to Caucasian skin tones, which are quite close to some of the Citadel skin tones, but with much better coverage. Finally, we have a white to grey and grey to black Triad. White Star is pretty good, not as good as Pro Acryl White, but still pretty good. All paints cover very well. The only thing I'm missing is a dark grey like Citadel's Ashen Grey, as there's quite a big gap between Dungeon Stone Grey and Death Reaper Shadow. Let's move on to the metallics. I have to say, these really impressed me. Two Thin Coats Metallics formula feels extremely similar to the more expensive premium metallic paints from Games Workshop with the white caps, but without this separation issue. They have very fine metallic particles and very high opacity, and they go on very smoothly. Games Workshop's white cap metallics are notorious for separating very badly, but that's not the case with Duncan's metallics, and they also don't have the drying time issue of the other two Thin Coats paints. The silver paints and the bronze cover in 1 to 2 coats over a dark base coat. The gold colors need 2 to 3, which is absolutely amazing, especially for gold and bronze paints. The colors are very close matches to their Citadel counterparts, but unfortunately the silver Triad is impaired by plate armor, which is hardly different to Surcoat Silver, which is an almost 1-to-1 match to Lead Belcher, but with finer metallic particles. All in all, I think Two Thin Coats Metallics compete with the best metallics in the Citadel range and outperform many other paint ranges such as the Army Painter's Warpaints and Vallejo Model and Game Color Metallics. I would say that Vallejo Model Air Steel and the Vallejo Metal Color range are still a little ahead, but those are really the only ones. Well done, Duncan. Finally, the 6 washes. I heard in an earlier video review that the washes would be quite thick, but maybe that was because early samples were tested. The washes I received in my Kickstarter shipment have a perfect fluid consistency with a low surface tension, so they settle evenly on the model. Two Thin Coats washes are more pigmented than the new Formula Citadel shade paints that come in the 80ml pots and darken the base coat more, while drying to a very matte finish. So if you prefer the old Citadel shade paints, you might want to give Duncan Rhodes washes a try. Here are all the washes painted over white primer, and in fact, some washes are very similar to the Citadel shade counterparts, but a few are slightly different. For example, Battle Mud Wash is a slightly more yellowish brown than Agrak's Earthshade. Overall, the washes also get a thumbs up from me. I love the new Formula Citadel shade paints, but I would certainly find a use for the Two Thin Coats washes as a more pigmented alternative. So now we know the strengths and minor weaknesses of the Two Thin Coats paint range. But to whom would I actually recommend the paints? Before I give my answer to that, why don't you smash the like button, subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so I can make more reviews like this. You can also support me on Patreon for exclusive tutorials and resources. Thanks a lot, and now, who would I actually recommend committing to yet another hobby paint range? Well, if you like the bright and bold colors and satin finish of the Citadel paint range, but prefer dropper bottles, Duncan Rhodes paints could be worth a look. Or if you feel that the coverage of Citadel layer paints leaves something to be desired and crave for a more opaque paint. Or if you don't like the new Formula shade paints, Two Thin Coats washes could be a good alternative, as well for those who look for excellent metallic paints. If you like AK Interactive's 3rd gen paints but wish they were more fantasy colors, 2 thin coats could also be a good complement. Or if you like the richly pigmented Pro Acryl paints and their smooth finish but wish they would have more body, then Duncan's paints would be a solid choice. In general, if a paint with a longer working time doesn't put you off, for example if you use blending and glazing techniques regularly and or don't mind spending a few bucks extra for a superior pigmentation, 2 thin coats might be worth it. This brings us to the roundup and pros and cons. 2 thin coats have a silky smooth consistency, superior pigmentation and high opacity. The metallics are amazing and the washes are richer than Citadel's new formula shade paints. Downsides are the high price tag. 2 thin coats are the most expensive miniature paint per milliliter, beating even Citadel paints. The paint range is small, missing a lot of key colors you can't achieve with mixing alone, and the composition of some trials is a bit unbalanced with a few colors that are too similar to each other. I also want to mention the longer drying time, which is not a bad thing per se and can even be beneficial to your painting style. For me personally, Duncan's metallics have already replaced some of my previous favorite metallic paints. Time will tell whether the regular acrylics can also replace larger parts of my paint collection. In conclusion, the positives and the high quality definitely outweigh the minor drawbacks for me, so I'm very happy to give Duncan Rhodes 2 thin coats paints an 8.5 out of 10. You know what people hate? Change. And with the help of painting legend Acryl, Vallejo not only changed but reinvented their venerable game color paint range. A more matte finish, better pigmentation, lots of new colors, but also a lot of old colors gone or changed. I'm afraid whether the new game color formula is really an improvement or only catering to pro painters like Acryl while neglecting the needs of us more average painters. Was the old game color range really so bad it needed to be redone from scratch? I'm Stahly from Tale of Painters and I answer this question and more in my review of the complete new Vallejo Game Color range. In October 2022, Acrylicos Vallejo relaunched their brand for the release of their new Express and Game Color ranges. They got a fancy new logo, and Acryl seems to have become Vallejo's new brand ambassador, who also had great influence on the development of their new paint ranges, especially the new Game Color range. Vallejo and Acryl completely reworked the formula, and apparently the new game colors have a more matte finish, improved opacity and pigmentation, and a longer working and drying time. For those that don't know, the original game color range was modeled after the former Citadel paint range that was discontinued in 2012. Urban legend has it that Games Workshop commissioned Vallejo to take over the production of their paint range back in the day. But when nothing came of it, Vallejo is said to have simply released the color range on their own as Game Color. I don't know if that's true, but if nowadays a manufacturer were to so brazenly copy another manufacturer's paint range, color by color, there would probably be quite a shitstorm. Anyways, let's take a look at the new range. There are 136 colors in total, which break down into 80 regular acrylics, 9 metallics, 12 inks, 8 washes, 8 fluorescent colors, 12 special FX paints, 7 additives and varnishes, and we also have the 24 new express colors to complement the range, bringing the number up to 160 paints. According to Vallejo's website, the range has been designed according to a base, shadow, layer system of triads, but honestly, I don't see anything of that. Some colors are arranged in triads, but some in quartets, and in between you always find the odd color or two. There's also no guide printed on the labels, though Vallejo's color chart should point you in the right direction of which colors are meant to go together. Compared to the old game color range, a total of 38 colors have been discontinued. If you rely on any of these paints, then stock up now while the old range is still available. Some colors have been renamed, but kept their original product number. Bronze flesh tone became bronze brown, cadmium skin became skin tone, heavy warm gray became warm gray, cold gray became neutral gray, and heavy charcoal became just charcoal. Also keep in mind that because of the new formula and finish, old colors that have been carried over to the new range will look slightly different. More about that later. There are also quite a few new colors that close some of the gaps of the old range. 44 colors in total. Nevertheless, the game color range is quite small compared to Citadel or Reaper, and what I'm still missing are petrol colors, more grey tones, dark skin tones and more muted and natural light skin tones, as all of the light skin tones in the game color range are quite pink and peach. Well, with that out of the way, let's delve into the paint range. The new Game Color paints come in more sustainable bottles made from recycled PET, which I really appreciate, and they also contain more paint. Old Game Color bottles had 70 ml of paint, while the new ones have 80 ml, even though the bottles look a bit smaller. The plastic used for the bottle is completely transparent, so you can assess the colors better, and it also feels a bit thinner, which makes the bottles more squeezy, so watch out for accidental paint explosions. The tip has become thicker, which should make them less prone to splitting, which I welcome. Let's take a look at the 80 regular acrylic paints first. These cover most bases from all primary and secondary colors, bone, brown and skin tone colors, and grayscale paints as well. And spoiler alert, the acrylics are fantastic. Super smooth and creamy consistency, and no, they didn't just convert them to the model color formula. The new game colors are thinner, so they don't require much if any additional dilution, but this is not at the expense of opacity as the coverage is amazing. The mid-tone and darker colors cover a medium gray base coat in 1 to 2 coats, the lighter colors in 2 to 3, and they apply so smoothly it's just a joy to paint with them, be it for base coating or fine highlights. If you're only familiar with Citadel colors, I would describe the new game colors like a freshly opened Citadel layer paint with a little bit of water added, while retaining the opacity of a base paint. In terms of pigmentation and creaminess, they're definitely up there with paint ranges like AK Interactive 3rd Gen, 2 thin coats and Pro Acryl paints. The only colors that slightly disappointed me in terms of opacity were most of the yellow and orange paints and Bile Green. Since the other colors cover so amazingly, I had hoped that Vallejo had finally cracked the code for creating yellow and orange paints that aren't a pain in the butt, but no. The game color yellows and oranges still require quite a lot of coats to become fully opaque. At least they are a little better than their Citadel counterparts, but don't expect miracles. Because of the super smooth consistency, the new game colors also spray very well through an airbrush with a little bit of airbrush thinner, and because of the high pigmentation, they also dry brush well, though you might want to let them sit on a dry palette for a minute or two so they can thicken a little bit. I noticed that the new Formula game colors have a longer drying time than Citadel and the Army Painter, and this is probably where Angel influence shows, because a longer working time makes the paints excellent for more advanced painting techniques like blending. But if you just want to paint your minis quickly, the long drying time can be a bit of a pain when applying base coats, even when batch painting. Once dry, they are more matte than the old game colors and also more matte than Citadel for sure. Now a lot of pro painters favor matte paints, but keep in mind that matte paints are more prone to abrasion as matte resins are not as strong as more glossy ones. But the big question remains, are the new game colors compatible with the old ones? I already listed at the beginning of the video which colors have been discontinued, but what about old colors with the same name? Did they stay the same? Can you switch from old to new during your painting projects without any issues? Well, first of all, the new game colors are more matte, which definitely changes the color impression. Matte paints look paler than glossy ones, even if they use the same pigments. But the colors themselves have also changed slightly. As you can see here, I have randomly selected a couple old new colors, and the difference is sometimes more, sometimes less noticeable. If you use a color only for small details, it might not be an issue, but if, for example, you have used an old game color on a large area like the power armor of your Space Marines, it's very likely that a model painted with a new game color will look different when standing next to a model painted with the old version. So I definitely recommend stocking up on old game colors you depend on, as long as there are still old paints available. But apart from these minor issues, the new game color acrylics are amazing and really feel like next gen miniature paints that are up there with more pricier paints like Pro Acryl or 2 thin coats. Let's move on to the metallics, and this is where it slowly starts to go downhill. The silver paints are okay, but rather thin. Their consistency is more like airbrush paint and much thinner than the old game color metallics. You can work with them, but they are not as good as steel from the Vallejo Model Air series and steel and dark steel from the Mecha Color series. Those are also airbrush paints, but their opacity is higher and they apply more nicely with a brush. Moreover, those 3 colors correspond very closely to the classic 3 silver paints from Games Workshop: Mithril Silver, Chainmail and Bolt Gun Metal, or Stormhose Silver, Iron Hand Steel and Lead Belcher for those that aren't a grizzly grey hunter like me. Whereas the new game color gunmetal is significantly darker than Lead Belcher and even darker than Iron Warriors. I am really disappointed with the gold colors though. Shining gold and glorious gold are not only thin but weak and need many coats to cover. By now, we have many better options for gold paints, and I recommend Retributor Armor as well as Duncan Road's Toothed Ink coats and Pro Acryl golds, which just cover so much better. To a degree, the same is true for the bronze paints, which are also rather thin. Here I would prefer Runelord Brass and Brass Scorpion. Hammered Copper and Tinny Tin are decent however, and cover well. All in all, the new Game Color metallics are okayish, but I don't understand why Angel and Vallejo chose such a thin consistency, since Vallejo already offers many pre-thinned airbrush paints with their Model Air and Game Air series. The Game Color range is a brush painting range for me, so I would have preferred a thicker consistency. These didn't change very much at all and should be consistent with their old versions, but for some reason Vallejo removed the green and grey wash and added a yellow wash instead. While the colors themselves stayed consistent, I did notice that they float better than the old washes. I heard they switched to a medium based on the new Express Color formula. Compared to the updated Citadel shade paints, Game Color washes are richer and have a slightly stronger tint, and they also dry more matte. Black wash is a decent black wash, more like the old formula Nuln Oil for those that don't like the new formula. Umber and Sepia wash are two interesting shades of brown. I really like Umber wash as it is a blacker brown than Agrax Earth shade. Flesh wash is also very interesting. It's less orange-reddish than Rakeland Flesh shade, but a nuance more purple, similar in tone to Targo Rage shade but lighter. I can recommend all of these as they expand and complement the brown and flesh shade paints from the Citadel range nicely. The colored washes, on the other hand, are very bright compared to their counterparts from Games Workshop or the Army Painter. Especially Yellow Wash, which is almost unusable because the yellow pigment they chose is so light that you can hardly see the wash even over white primer. Red, blue and purple are okay, but the red and blue washes are also very bright, so they are only suitable for shading really light colors, which limits their usefulness. The game inks also stayed pretty much the same, which is good news for those that like the old Game Color inks. However, they removed brown and smoky ink, which of all things were the only ones I was still using, and added a new magenta, dark turquoise and white ink instead. In general, I have moved on to contrast-like paints. In fact, Game Color inks and the new Express colors are very similar in terms of consistency and pigmentation. The only difference is in their behavior. As you can see, the Game Color inks create harsher transitions as the pigments tend to collect in the recesses more, whereas Express colors create a more even tint with softer transitions. Personally, I prefer the formula of the new Express colors, and I'm not sure whether having two almost identical products in a single paint range was really necessary. I would have preferred the inks to be migrated to the Express color range instead, but that's just me. Remember, when painting miniatures, it's not always about right or wrong, but different approaches that are all equally valid. There are many roads that lead to Terra, and if you were an avid user of the old Game Color inks, then you'll be happy they haven't changed. Now the fluorescent paints. The selection has been greatly expanded compared to the old Game Color range, and there are some cool colors in there that you don't see that often as fluorescent versions, for example magenta and cold green. Though I miss a typical plasma glow turquoise. By nature, fluorescent paints tend to be rather transparent, as you can see here, so I recommend using these with an airbrush so you can build up multiple thin layers quickly. With a brush, you will need to apply lots and lots of layers for an even coverage, so if you don't have an airbrush, I recommend using them more like a glaze over a matching base coat. It would have been great if Vallejo could have made their fluo paints more opaque, but they are on the same level as other fluorescent paints like those from the AK Interactive 3rd Gen range, so I can't complain too much. The Special FX paints are Vallejo's answer to Citadel's technical paints, and here I faced mixed results. The blood colors are not bad, but in terms of consistency and behavior, they're practically contrast or express colors that dry glossy. They are lacking the gooey gel-like consistency of Blood for the Blood God I like so much, but on the other hand, their red hues are a little more muted and realistic for those who prefer that. Demon Blood is just a deep purple, and if the color did not dry glossy, it would have been a better fit for the Express color range in my opinion. Similarly, Bile, Vomit and Acid are also practically glossy Express colors. Rust, Corrosion and Galvanic Corrosion are all very similar browns, and maybe it's just me, but I'm really missing a more orange rust color here. Green rust is similar to Nihala oxide, an opaque wash for creating verdigris. Moss and lichen is a weird yellow ochre color. No idea of how to use it for moss, I'm afraid. The most interesting FX paint is probably frost, which is a very thin white wash. When it dries, it creates a subtle blooming effect. All in all, with a few exceptions, the special FX colors are not bad and better than the Army Painter's effect paints in my opinion. Though if in doubt, I would always go for the technical paints from Games Workshop. I feel these are more straightforward to use and do what they say on the tin better. But for those who want to create more subtle effects and like to experiment, the Game Color Special FX paints might be worth a look. Last but not least, we have a few additives like this metallic medium, which is basically white metallic particles you can mix into other paints to give them a metallic sheen. There's also an airbrush thinner and glaze medium, as well as 4 varnishes from glossy to ultra matte. You have to be careful with the new Game Color varnishes because they are not water-based, unlike the old ones, but polyurethane-based. Polyurethane varnishes are more durable, but more aggressive and can reactivate inks, contrast and express colors, as well as washes and shade paints, and also damage decals. Polyurethane varnishes are useful for preparing models for oil paints and enamel washes, but what's the reason to put them into an acrylic paint range? I don't know. I don't think polyurethane varnishes are suitable for the average painter, so maybe that's a question for Angel. And that was the complete new Game Color range in Fast Forward, except for the 24 Express colors, which I've reviewed in a separate video. So now I have to give my verdict, and I have to say, I am conflicted. If I were to rate only the regular Game Color acrylics, I would have to give them a 9 or 9.5 because of their high quality, smooth consistency and amazing opacity and all that for a more than competitive price. To answer the question from the beginning, no, the new Game Colors aren't just for pro painters. I think they are a significant improvement for painters of any skill level, so good job Angel and Vallejo. On the other hand, many of my favorite colors have been removed, and in general, all the new Game Colors changed slightly from the previous versions because of the new formula and more matte finish, which is always annoying when you need to replace an old paint. The brown and black washes are decent, but the colored washes are too bright to be as universally useful as the shades you find in Siddle's washes range. The inks haven't changed much and are still alright, but I find the Express Color formula to be superior, so I don't really have a need for them anymore. The Special FX and Flu paints are solid, but don't knock my socks off either, and the metallics are rather thin and weak, which is surprising as Vallejo makes so many great metallic paints. Therefore, I'm afraid I have to lower my rating and give the new Game Color range a total score of 7, not counting the Express colors which I reviewed separately. This might sound a bit harsh, but don't get me wrong, the new Vallejo Game Color range is still a solid paint range. But if all paints would have been as spectacular as the new acrylics, the range could have become one of, if not the best miniature paint range out there, so kind of a missed opportunity. All you need to know about the updated Vallejo model color range in one video. I've tested all 220 colors and will address all your burning questions. How does the new model color compare to the old version? Did they simply adopt the Game Color formula? Which colors were discontinued and which new colors were added? And do they suffer from the same bubbling issue that some people have complained about with the new Game Colors? I'm Stahly from Tale of Painters, and this is my review of the entire new Vallejo model color range. Did you know that model color first appeared in 1992 and has remained unchanged since 1998? So, it was high time for an overhaul, and frankly, it wasn't surprising that this was coming. Since their rebranding at the end of 2022, Vallejo has revamped the Game Color and Game Air paints, so it was only a matter of time before the model color range had to follow suit. Let's start with the most important information. The new model colors have indeed been reformulated from the ground up, rather than just receiving a new label design like Vallejo did with the Mecha Color and Metal Color ranges. They also discontinued 30 colors and added 32 new colors, or references as Vallejo likes to call them. For this video, I've tested each and every of the 220 colors in the new model color range, and I'll explain exactly what you can expect from the updated formula. Of course, I'll also compare the new model colors with their old versions as well as the new game colors. Speaking of game colors, the new model colors now come in the same bottles made of sustainable plastic, but with a white ring. These bottles are not only completely transparent and very easy to dispense, you also get 80 ml of paint instead of 70 ml, or for the same price as before. But enough preamble, let's get to testing some paints. I'll start with the metallics because they're often a good indicator of the quality of the raw materials and pigments used. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Vallejo produces some of the best metallic paints out there. I'm a huge fan of Mortal Air Steel as well as the metallics from the Mecha Color range. I know a lot of people also love the Metal Color and Liquid Metal ranges, which, by the way, didn't change and just got the updated design. But to be honest, the old Model Color metallics weren't that great. I found they had a slightly thick and gel-like consistency. The coverage was only mediocre, as the paints were based on cheaper mica metallic particles. Other Vallejo metallic paints use aluminium flakes, like most modern paint ranges like the Army Painter's Warpaints Fanatic do. So let's see if Vallejo was able to improve. Well, at first glance, not much has changed. We have the same 10 colors as in the old range. These include a mix of silver, gold and bronze tones, which are all a bit more muted and more realistic as, say, Citadel's gold and bronze colors. There's also a blue-silver. It would have been nice if they would have added some more variety, but more vivid metallic colors can be found in the game color range. But one thing has changed for sure, and that's the consistency. It has become thinner and creamier, but not as thin as the new game color metallics. I find the new formula of the metallics easier to apply, and the coverage has been minimally improved despite the thinner consistency. Additionally, the metallic particles have become finer, resulting in a nicer finish. Considering that, I give the Model Color metallics 7 out of 10 points. Compared to game color, the finish is the same, but the consistency is not as thin, more ideal for brush painting. However, a few colors tend to separate and the opacity is not as high as with the Mecha and Metal Color metallics. But I love the slightly more realistic gold tones, which also provide slightly better coverage than the more yellow and orange game color counterparts. So far, so good. I'm super excited to try out and compare the non-metallic paints next. But before I delve into the main part of the range, let's briefly touch on the auxiliary products and all the colors that have been discontinued. Overall, the additives and auxiliaries have remained the same, only the crackle medium has been removed. There are various mediums for thinning paints and adjusting their sheen, the popular plastic putty, which I prefer over liquid green stuff, a chipping effect for weathering, as well as a couple of varnishes. Unlike the varnishes from the new game color range, which are polyurethane based, the model color varnishes are purely water based. I think water-based varnishes are more fail-safe to use because I found that polyurethane can dissolve certain inks, washes and especially speed paints. In my opinion, it would have made more sense to make the game color varnishes water-based and the model color washes polyurethane, but oh well. Last but not least, we also have decal softeners, but I would recommend Microsol over Vallejo's decal softeners as the latter can be a bit weak. But all in all, I'd give the auxiliaries a solid 8 out of 10, and I particularly like the fact that the model color flyer explains how to use each product, including the recommended mixing ratios. No longer part of the range are the glazes from the old model color range, as well as the fluorescent paints. The fluos are now part of the game color range, but the glazes have been discontinued. Additionally, 6 out of the 8 transparent colors are no longer part of the range. Only wood grain and smoke remain under the new names Mahogany Ink and Smoke Ink. Instead, the new model color range features 32 new colors, which fill some gaps of the old range. The new model color palette, like the game color range, has been restructured according to the BSL base shade layer system. This means you'll find a matching shadow and highlight paint for each color, which you can find in the flyer from Vallejo's website. In the flyer, you also find an overview of all 220 colors. And now, here's what you've been waiting for. I'll test the 194 regular non-metallic acrylic paints. So, how does the new model color formula compare? Is it truly better than before? Well, when I think back, I have both fond and not so fond memories of the old model colors. I remember the consistency of the old model color paints was quite thick, similar to Citadel base paints or the old army painter war paints, and dried rather quickly. The coverage was above average most of the time, except for bright, vibrant colors like yellow, orange and red. These boasted high saturation, but with a low amount of opaque pigments, they were usually quite transparent. I just made a video ranking 24 bright yellow paints from 14 different brands, and the old model color yellow scored pretty low. But I don't want to sound too negative. I did enjoy a lot of the colors in the old range. My favorites were perhaps the grey tones, as well as the white, which was one of the better ones. And the black provided great coverage with a single coat. It was super matte. However, I found that some colors separated heavily over time. This means that the heavy pigments sink to the bottom, while the lighter, transparent binder migrates to the top, resulting in an uneven consistency. Now, first the good news. I tested all of the 194 acrylic paints and can say that the consistency issues have been fixed. The new model colors hardly separate and are ready to use after a brief shake. The paint is now slightly thinner, similar to Citadel layer paints or AK's 3rd gen paints. Fortunately, this hasn't affected their coverage, which remains as high as before and has even been improved for many lighter and brighter colors. They also retained their beautiful matte finish. This was achieved through advancements in the chemical composition of acrylic paints in recent years. Higher pigment concentrations combined with added opaque pigments like white and grey increase coverage. This is always a balancing act. A lot of pure and bright pigments often mean lower opacity, while more opaque pigments make the colors duller. For example, the new Warpaints Fanatic have quite a lot of opaque pigments, which makes some of the brighter colors slightly pastel. But Vallejo has struck a good balance. The vibrant colors are still just as vibrant as in the old model color range, sometimes even a touch more intense than the predecessors. I noticed the drying time has increased, as well as the self-leveling properties, which allows the paint to spread more evenly and without visible brush strokes. The paints work very well in the airbrush, the model color range has a matching thinner, and I recommend adding a drop of flow improver as well. The longer working time also makes blending easier. As I mentioned earlier, 32 new colors have been added to the range, with 30 colors discontinued. But how well do the new versions match the old ones? Vallejo promises that they have tested all colors for color fidelity, but I will put that to the test. Here you can see a selection of old and new model colors, a mix of vibrant and more muted hues, and also some metallics. What do you think? At first glance, I think the match is pretty good. However, upon closer inspection, there are minimal deviations. The new version of Violet Red has a slightly more red hue, the new Park Green flat is slightly more yellowish, and the new Dark Grey is slightly bluish. The metallics also have a slightly different finish due to the finer aluminium particles. What I do like, however, is that the vibrant colors are just as saturated as before, despite the improved opacity. By the way, if you want to get a feel of the new model color range yourself, then download my digital color swatch. This is a professional reproduction of all 220 colors, hand-painted on plastic card, much more true to life than the color chart on the website. I've also created matching compatible charts for Game Color, Citadel, AK, Warpaints Fanatic and many more, allowing you to compare colors from different paint ranges. You can find my swatches on my Patreon for a small donation. Now, if you have already tried the new Game Color range from Vallejo, you might wonder now. Do the new model colors have the same formula as the new game colors? And although Vallejo oddly does not make a statement about this, I would say, huh? Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this review, and if you don't want to miss out on the latest paint and hobby product reviews, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. There will be many more videos coming. And to answer the question, yes, I say it's the same formula. Or at least a very similar one.
Huh?
They feel the same on the brush and they have the same matte finish. Now, for me that's not an issue, as I really like Vallejo's Game Color range, but since my Game Color video, I've received many messages and comments from people who have problems with excessive bubbling. For some reasons, I overlooked this, probably because other paint ranges also form bubbles. Citadel paints, thinned with water, produce many bubbles, for example, as do some colors from the AK 3rd Gen range, especially the metallics. And it's usually not that big of an issue if the bubbles dissolve when drying. The problem, however, is that with the new game colors, the bubbles can leave marks on the model when dried. So what about the new model colors? Same issue. Let's find out. I give them a really hard and long shake, apply them to my wet palette, and stir them a lot when thinning them with some water. As you can see, bubbles form, and these bubbles also transfer to the model. Here is what the model looks after it's dried. So yes, as you can see, you can make model color bubble, as the formula is pretty much the same as game color. Whether this is a problem for you, you have to decide for yourself. I have to say, I use the game color range quite frequently and have never had bubbles showing up on a finished model. Perhaps it's because I'm such a slow painter. Taking your time can help avoiding the bubble problem. Also, shaking the paints only briefly is advisable. Both game and model colors are quite stable, and if you use them regularly, they hardly need to be shaken. When thinning, be sure to stir slowly and avoid synthetic brushes with stiff bristles, as they create more friction when applying paint to the model. Having said that, if you already tested the new game colors and had difficulties with them, then the new model colors won't convince you either. This makes finding a rating for the acrylics challenging. In my game color review, I gave the non-metallic acrylics a 9 out of 10 because I love the high opacity, matte finish and found the consistency perfect. The model color paints are more of the same, although looking back, I would deduct a point because of the bubbling, so 8 out of 10. That would also be my overall rating for the new model color range. It's slightly higher than my score of the game color range because I found the game color effect paints and washes a bit disappointing, so I had to take this into consideration. Now the final question. New model color or AK's 3rd generation acrylic paints? The 3rd gen paints from AK Interactive are popular among many pro painters and high profile YouTubers. But are they suitable for you if you're more of a beginner or intermediate painter? Or should you opt for newer paint ranges like Warpaints Fanatic or Too Thin Coats? I'm Stahly from Tale of Painters, and in this video I'll be reviewing not only all 236 AK 3rd Gen paints, including the brand new Color Punch sub-range, but also reveal the IMO biggest issue with this paint range and how to overcome it. For those who don't know me yet, I regularly test the latest releases in the miniature paint market. By now, I think I might have ended up with one of the largest miniature paint collections in the world. Many of you have often asked me in the comments of my videos if I could test the 3rd gen range from AK, even though it's been out for quite a while now. Your wish is my command. I've been using AK paint for several years, so I knew what to expect. But for this review, I've acquired a complete core range of 230 plus colors, including the brand new Color Punch paints. Actually, this is not all, as the 3rd gen range has a few more expansions. There is the AFV series with 80 additional colors for tanks and other combat vehicles, the Air series, which is actually not an airbrush range but a selection of 120 colors for painting aircraft models, plus the figure range for painting busts and larger models with 40 more colors. In this video, I'll be looking at the core general range, which is the best choice for tabletop and scale model painters, as it offers everything you need from regular acrylics to metallics, plus a couple of useful additives and effect paints. There is one thing I really don't like about this paint range. You might have a hunch of what it could be when looking at the official color chart. But more about that later. Let's go through all the paint types of the core range step by step. I would like to start with the metallics because in my opinion, metallic paints are always a good indicator of the quality of a paint range. The general range has a total of 20 metallic colors and you can recognize them by this blue label. Alongside staples like silver, gold and various bronze and copper tones, there are also some colored metallics, which is quite cool as not every range has those. AK paints are available in 17ml dropper bottles of standard size. Unfortunately, the bottles do not contain pre-installed mixing balls, and that's a problem because the metallics tend to separate. This means that over time, the denser pigments separate from the transparent binder medium and sink to the bottom. I didn't have this problem that much with the darker metallics, but with the lighter ones, simply shaking wasn't enough. Instead, I had to use my vortex mixer to get those paints to the perfect consistency. Did you have a similar experience? Let me know in the comments. However, once you've put in the work, you'll be rewarded with a beautiful sparkling finish with very fine metallic particles. The consistency is a bit on the thinner side, but this helps to apply the paint smoothly. The coverage with the darker colors is very good, but the lighter metallics pose some problems here too, as they are noticeably less opaque, especially the 4 white silver colors, dark aluminium, silver and pearl, as well as the light gold tones. Perhaps due to the excessive shaking and mixing, I sometimes had the issue of the paints throwing many micro bubbles, which don't disappear completely when drying if you're not careful. Overall, the metallics have their ups and downs. I love the finish, but for the lighter ones, I would rather go for other paint ranges such as Pro Acryl or Too Thin coats. Therefore, I can give the metallics only 6 out of 10 points. The darker metallics are really good, don't get me wrong, but the lighter ones bring down the overall result for me. That's a bit of a rough start. I hope this review doesn't go downhill from here. Before I dive into the regular acrylics and the new Color Punch paints, let's briefly touch on the additives, effect paints and inks. With the additives, labeled in grey, you get some useful mediums that you can mix into paints to tweak their finish. They do what they're supposed to do, 9 out of 10 points, really solid products. The effect paints are quite new additions to the range, they have a light green label. So far there's a blood paint, which is quite dark like old dried blood, a pasty viscera paint and a chipping effect. Perhaps these are not my most favorite blood paints, but with some experimentation I'm sure you can pull off quite unique effects. 6 out of 10. Something that's no longer available are these brown labeled inks, as they have been replaced by AK's new range in pipette bottles. Unlike other inks such as Game Color or most contrast and speed paints, the brown label AK inks contained a high proportion of opaque covering pigments. This means that they were only semi-transparent and visible even on dark base coats. Think of Nihilak Oxide from Games Workshop, which has quite a similar feel. They were lacking in terms of saturation, which is why they've probably been replaced with the new range. I give them 7 out of 10 as they were quite unique, but I think they would have been more useful if there would have been more brown and rust colors for weathering. Alright, let's take a look at the bread and butter part of the range, the regular non-metallic acrylic paints. Will these provide us with an answer to why AK 3rd Gen has such a good reputation among pro painters? Let's find out. The regular acrylic paints come in not 1 but 3 different labels, actually 4 counting the new Color Punch paints. First, there are the yellow label Intense colors. Don't confuse these with the likes of Citadel base paints or the old Citadel foundation paints. They are not designed to be super covering. Instead, they contain a high proportion of pure pigment, making them extra vibrant at an expense of opacity. Next, we have a handful of pastel colors with a cyan blue label. These are extra light colors you can use for extreme edge highlights or for brightening up darker colors. Having tried them all, I'm not sure if they really needed their own label. I think they could have been part of the orange label colors, which make up the majority of the range. Here you will find all the regular non-metallic paints, but to make things a bit confusing, the orange label also has a couple of fluorescent colors and clear paints sprinkled in. The 5 fluo paints are quite thin and weak like fluorescent paints usually are, while the 5 clear paints are highly glossy inks that can be sprayed through an airbrush as transparent filters, for example. Personally, I think it would have been made more sense to give these their own labels instead of the pastel colors. But enough of the nitpicking, how do the paints perform? Well, with the acrylics I had less of a separation issue than with the metallics. I only encountered it with a few colors, mainly the intense label ones, and shaking them was usually enough to restore their consistency. Speaking of consistency, what do you think? I feel it's quite nice, and probably one of the range's main selling points. It's not too thin, not too thick, and perhaps, most importantly, very consistent across the board. By that, I mean hardly any differences in thickness and density between the various colors. The application is nice and smooth, they have a good flow, and they thin well without breaking apart, for example when glazing. The self-leveling properties are good. Not quite as good as with too thin coats or Pro Acryl, but still in the top tier. Whether it's base coating, highlighting or dry brushing, I feel like the paint is working with you and not against you. They dry to a matte finish with a slight sheen. One thing I noticed is that a lot of colors become darker in their dried state, which is also a thing for Pro Acryl paints, for example. When it comes to airbrushing 3rd gen paints, I have read mixed reviews online. Some posts were very positive, others seem to have had problems. I have tested a few colors and I have to say that once you get a feel for the correct thinning ratio, I was able to achieve very good results. As always, I used my trusty Vallejo paint thinner with a drop of flow improver, but AK also offers their own range of thinners. But what about brush coverage? Actually, pretty good. I would say better than with Games Workshop and on par with Pro Acryl. But, and here comes a slight but, not quite as good as with paint ranges like Too Thin Coats or Warpaints Fanatic, which feature a very high amount of opaque pigment. In general, AK 3rd Gen went for a higher proportion of pure color pigment, which results in higher saturation, especially with the brighter and more vibrant colors. Perhaps that's why they're popular among pro painters who don't mind to apply an extra coat or two. But to come back to the question posed in the intro, would I recommend the paint range for beginners and advanced painters alike? Well, except for the metallics, it's a very balanced paint range and therefore I can recommend the paint itself for painters of any skill level. But I have one major gripe, and I believe that those who don't have much experience with color theory will struggle with it as well. And that's the official paint chart, more precisely its lack of organization. See, other paint ranges like Too Thin Coats or Reaper are organized into triads, which make it easy for beginners and even colorblind people to understand which colors go together. Warpaints Fanatic are even structured in sets of 6 steps from dark to light, with a graphic printed on the bottles. In contrast, AK 3rd Gen seems like a chaotic bunch of colors, and it doesn't help that the range has that many similar shades. Need 5 almost identical dark rays that differ only in nuances, or 6 almost identical medium reds. Well, brilliant, and AK 3rd Gen is right up your alley. Don't get me wrong, choice is great, especially if you're a paint nerd and know all the designations of all the fundamental pigments in your sleep. But good luck determining the differences based on the official chart, as it is like all digital paint swatches not very accurate. This makes buying paint a gamble, especially online, where you have to rely on product photos provided by the manufacturer. This very issue actually held me back from investing more in the 3rd Gen range for a long time, because I simply didn't know which colors to add to my collection. And because it annoyed me so much, I sat down and came up with a solution. I painted all 236 colors, plus the discontinued inks and the deep shade washes on plastic card, professionally photographed them, and created one of my hand-painted color swatches. For this, I've reorganized the colors in families, for example, grouping all muted reds from light to dark, all warm reds, then all cool reds, and so on. I also made an alternative version that's identical to the order in the official paint chart, so you have that as well. And of course, The chart is also compatible with my other charts for Citadel, the Army Painter, Vallejo and two thin coats, allowing you to cross-compare different paint ranges, for example, to convert old paint schemes or tutorials from White Dwarf. You can find my hand-painted swatches for a small donation on Patreon, and I think they make expanding your paint collection much easier and help you avoid making any more purchasing mistakes. I hope that AK will soon come up with a guide for recommended color combinations on their own, as Vallejo did with their revised model color range, which is the counterpart to AK's 3rd gen range. If you're interested in a review of the new model color formula, make sure you subscribe to my channel as you don't want to miss it. I also appreciate a thumbs up, as it helps me reach more people as my subscriber count is still rather low. What's not low is my score for AK's acrylic paints. Despite my difficulties navigating the color palette, I give the yellow, orange and blue label paints, and actually the whole range, a solid 8 out of 10 points. Love it or hate it, but influencer hobby products have become a thing. We've witnessed XGW presenter Duncan Rhodes launching his own paint range, Anker Geraldes selling airbrushes, and now Monument Hobbies is stepping in with their Pro Acryl Signature series. They've already dropped 2 paint sets co-developed with YouTube legends Ninjon and Vince Venturella, and 2 more sets by pro painters Ben Comets and Matt Saxwish are out when you watch this. I'm Stahly from Tale of Painters, and in this review I'll be taking you through the entire Pro Acryl range with a special focus on the Signature series. Is this paint range truly living up to the hype, or are you just getting influenced? Ever since Monument Hobbies introduced the Pro Acryl paint range back in 2018, it has managed to garner a significant following and earn the endorsement of prominent hobby YouTubers and award-winning competition artists. My buddy Russ over at Warhammer even dedicated an entire video to why he thinks they're the absolute best miniature paints. Now, I'm always a bit wary of bold claims like these. I've reviewed a truckload of hobby paint ranges and found that they all have their pros and cons. So, after giving the complete Pro Acryl range, including the new Signature series, a thorough test drive, I've come to a conclusion to the question, are Pro Acryl really the best paints? Well, no, but yes. Let me explain. You see, Pro Acryl paints are genuinely top-notch. The pigmentation, vibrancy and the chemistry behind them are seriously impressive. When they first hit the scene in 2018, their formula was groundbreaking and second to none. But here's the deal. Other recently released paint ranges like AK 3rd Gen, two thin coats, the new Vallejo Game Colors or TT Combat paints have caught up. I also think that Pro Acryl paints are not for everyone, as they are not targeted at everyone. There's a bit of a learning curve involved that requires a certain level of experience. Before I dive into what I mean by that, let's check out what the Pro Acryl range has in its arsenal. At the time of this video, there are 102 colors in total, available individually or in various paint sets. The base set features a selection of 24 core colors and is a solid starting point, while 3 expansion sets carve out the range with more variety and depth. There's a set with 9 metallic colors and a set of transparent paints. The transparents aren't inks or contrast style paints, they're regular paints with the same consistency as other Pro Acryl paints, but with reduced opacity. They can be a bit tricky to use, and in my opinion, they work best thinned down as glazes or as filters applied with an airbrush. For instance, you could spray them over a pre-shaded model. However, they're quite a niche product and definitely not a must-have. I bet I like Pro Acryl's 3 washes. These bad boys flow like a dream and have a stronger tint compared to the new Citadel shade paints. The latest addition to the range are the 4 Signature series paint sets by Ninjon, Vince Venturella, Ben Comets and Matt Saxwish. More about the Signature series in a moment, let's first explore the characteristics and qualities that define Pro Acryl. These paints are manufactured in the United States, encased in 22ml dropper bottles featuring pre-installed agitators. Price-wise, they're quite reasonable considering the amount of paint you receive. The bottles have unique screw-top tips, which are a love it or hate it kind of affair. Before you can get painting, you must first remove the seal. Sometimes it satisfyingly comes off with a single pull, but sometimes it's more stubborn. The white ring must remain in place as it keeps the bottle airtight. Then the tip twists open, but twist too far and it may break. So far, so good, and the screw mechanism prevents the nozzles from blocking. But a significant drawback is the necessity to wipe the tip after each use to prevent the build-up of dried paint residue. Honestly, I'm not a big fan of the tips, and the plastic of the bottles is also quite hard to squeeze. Monument Hobbies offer more standard dropper bottle style nozzles for retrofitting, which I would prefer, but buying these for every paint can quickly add up. Please let me know in the comments about your experiences with the nozzles, maybe you're seeing something that I'm not. So if the bottles take some getting used to, the paint should better be fantastic. Unfortunately, Monument Hobbies deliver what they promise. The paint has very high opacity, an even, buttery consistency that makes them go on super smoothly with either brush or airbrush. They have a good amount of working time and they dry with a pleasant matte finish. The colors are pure and highly saturated, even the more muted shades retain a certain level of depth. Yet, I mentioned a learning curve, and there definitely is. The paint consistency leans towards the thinner end of the spectrum, displaying a lower viscosity than say citadel layer paints. But at the same time, they are exceptionally pigmented, often more opaque than a comparable citadel-based paint. Typically, mid-range and darker colors provide effective coverage in two thin coats, while lighter colors are a bit weaker and may require a few additional layers. And this is when the learning curve comes in, because when you're used to thicker body paints like Citadel Color or the Army Painter Warpaints, you will have to relearn how to paint to some extent. After all, a thick paint is easy to thin, but the reverse is more challenging. Pro-Acryl paints demand minimal, if any, thinning, particularly when using a wet palette. The extra moisture in the palette made some colors, like the yellows, almost too thin for my taste. But thanks to the thin consistency and high pigmentation, blending and edge highlighting with Pro-Acryl is a dream, whereas for dry brushing you might want to wait a bit for the paint to dry a little on a dry palette. The other point is that Pro-Acryl doesn't cater to the casual painter who wants to pop into a store and replicate a paint scheme by grabbing a set of colors from the shelf. Let's say you're painting ultramarines, then Citadel Color has a matching base, shade and highlight color specifically designed for painting blue power armor. In contrast, Pro-Acryl gives you a couple of blues, white and black and challenges you to experiment and mix. This doesn't have to be a bad thing, and moving out of your comfort zone means learning more about color theory and paint properties. For the average painter who just wants to paint an army effectively, however, this can prove a hurdle and perhaps explains why Pro-Acryl is more popular with experienced painters. And that's where the Signature series swoops in. Each of the 4 sets boasts 6 new colors co-developed with 4 skilled painters and content creators based on their respective paint styles and preferences. Apparently, they receive a share of the sales, as the website states that each purchase benefits the respective artist. Imagine having your own colors with your own name on them. I mean, which painter doesn't dream of that? I like the idea, but personally I would refrain from entering into a paid brand collaboration, because then I would no longer be able to provide you with unbiased hobby reviews. But I wouldn't knock any content creator for it, because let's face it, no paint brand would ask me anyway, because my YouTube channel isn't near the size of Ninja & Co. If you want to help me change that, then please smash the like button, subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so you stay up to date with the latest miniature paint ranges and hobby trends. You can also support me on Patreon for exclusive masterclass tutorials and resources, such as my hand-painted comparison charts of all contrast style paints and acrylic washes on the market. Thanks a lot, and now back to the paints. In Ninjon's set, you're treated to warm beige, cream and brown tones alongside a duo of warm magenta shades. I could see the set being a very good complement for painting and mixing skin tones of all kinds. Vince Venturella's set takes a cooler approach, featuring dark jade, blue-gray, cool purple and even a cool white. The pink skin tone and the ochre green feel a bit out of place, giving the set a touch of randomness. The sets by Ben Comet and Matt Saxwish bring the first satin and gloss colors to the Pro-Acryl range. I would only recommend these sets if you're really familiar with the style of the two painters, as the colors do not represent the matte qualities of Pro-Acryl. They are kind of their own niche within the range. If you're nonetheless interested in them, I recommend Monument Hobbies' Instagram channel. There are 2 posts where Matt and Ben explain the thoughts behind each of their colors. Now, back to the question I raised at the beginning of the video. Are Pro Acryl truly the ultimate miniature paints? As I said, yes, but no. No, because they are certainly not for everyone. Yes, because they do have incredible chemistry and pigmentation. And they can push you to up your painting game, challenging you to work with thinner layers and experiment with mixing new colors. But, perhaps most importantly, I believe it was Pro Acryl that have pioneered a new generation of acrylic paints, inspiring other brands to improve the quality of theirs. We see the result in the paint ranges that followed, namely AK 3rd Gen, 2 thin coats and the new Vallejo Game Colors, among others. And the Signature series is not just a cash grab, as they serve as a perfect gateway into the world of Pro Acryl. If you watch my channel, chances are you are pretty invested in miniature painting. You've likely got a paint stash and already own most, if not all, of the core colors from the Pro Acryl starter set. But the colors in the Signature series sets are more likely to add a touch of uniqueness that you might not have in your paint collection yet. And the small 6 color size make them perfect bite-sized samplers of the range. Just to make it clear, I would recommend the Ninja and Vince sets, as the other 2 sets are not representative of the whole range because of all the satin and gloss colors. In my opinion, the powerful combo of intense pigmentation, solid coverage, thin yet velvety consistency and matte finish still sets Pro Acryl apart, even though other brands have stepped up their game. I also dig the metallic paints and washes quite much. So, I'm giving the Pro Acryl range and the new Signature series a well-deserved rating of 8, and I've put them in a list of my favorite miniature paint ranges, which you can find in the comment section below. I did not give the full score because of the somewhat limited color palette to transparent paints, which I just didn't find universally useful, and of course the design of the nozzles and bottles, which is not my favorite. In this regard, I have a similar opinion of 2 thin coats paints by Duncan Rhodes. I'm not entirely sold on their bottles either, but their properties and matte finish complement Pro Acryl nicely. And if you still want more and want to know what the best contrast star paints are, then watch the video here on the right where I rank and review all 1 coat paints. Thanks a lot and happy hobbying!